Hello and welcome to episode 14 of Please Don't Eat the Sage Season 2. Before I introduce our final interview guest of the season, I want to give a little disclaimer on some technical difficulties that occurred while editing this episode. Unfortunately, my Zoom recording failed. Thankfully, I always have a backup recording going, but it was a little more difficult to edit both in visual and in audio form. So if there are a few glitches here and there in the edits or in the audio, I apologize. Perhaps we can say that there was just too much magic present for one video to handle. And now, on with the show.
All right. Welcome to our final interview of season 2 of Please Don't Eat the Sage. I am so thrilled, honored, and excited to have the guest for our final episode. And in fact, I was so excited I didn't pre-write an introduction for her, but the woman needs no introduction because I've been talking about her all season long. Our guest today is author Lisa Lister. She is the author of the book Witch. And in my opinion, it is the Bible for all baby witches to be able to introduce themselves to not only the craft, but a mindset that is just global energy shifting. Because it's not just about magic, it is about claiming your feminine divine right to magic. So welcome, and thank you so much for being here, Lisa Lister.
So excited. Thank you for having me. This is glorious.
Oh my gosh. I'm so happy that you're here. P.S. I have 2 little familiars that are just jarring their way around in the background. They're very excited that you're here as well.
Good on them. Good.
I have so many things that I would talk to you about, and honestly, a lot of it is probably going to be in Witch because you cover such amazing information in that book, both about your journey and just advice for introducing to people that are just intrigued by it. And actually on it, I got Witch the book on audiobook so many years ago, I can't even count. It was several years before I moved to LA, and that was at least like 3 to 4 years ago before that. So like at least 5 years ago was when I started listening to this book. And it's just because it was a topic that interests me, and kind of read through it in kind of a detached manner of, I want to know more about this, but this isn't really me. I love that other people call themselves witches, but a sorority that you need to pledge. And I don't know if I'm ready to pledge it. But also even in that mindset, it was such an open conversation of acceptance in the way that you wrote it. And one of my favorite chapters, that is the part that I've mentioned so many times in these interviews, is the one where you break down that there are so many different types of witches. Because I never really resonated with like paganism and like Wicca and like things like that. And so when I read the description of eclectic witch, I was like, that if I'm a witch, I'm that, because I'm just like cherry picking from here and there and any magical practice or any spiritual practice, I just go in and I find what resonates and I make it mine. And it was even before calling myself a witch, I want to thank you for that, because even a spiritual level now feel like I'm validated and I have permission for that. So thank you for writing this book. For those that haven't obsessed over your book, and P.S., almost everyone that I've mentioned it to has read it, so it is the Bible for baby witches. Tell us a little bit about your origin story, because yours is a juicy one.
So yes, and thank you for reading it and receiving it. And that's the joy of for me, what I believe witchcraft is us reminding each other, like, because there's nothing we don't know. There's nothing we don't know. Not really, not deep in our bellies and our bones. There's nothing we don't know about the fact that we're magic. The witch was just a recalling back, not just, but it was a calling back. It was a reclamation of that word, because when things are used against us, like they hold a different power. But when we claim them, we take the power back. And for me, that was the most essential part of writing that book, was for us to claim our power back. And I totally get why it's tricky as well for some people to use that word. It's potent. It holds a lot. And it has been used against us. Like, there's a good chance you're like, you can keep your distance. I ain't taking that word. Magic maker is way more glorious. And you don't have to take it, but having awareness of it is really, really crucial, I think, specifically for us, those of us who are exploring what it is to be a woman, what it is to be a human, what it is to be like someone who cares about feminine creative force. right? And it's like if you're exploring that, the creative force of making and birthing, and like whether that's babies, but whether that's life force, whether that's creative projects, whether that's oracle cards, whether that's books, we've got all of that potentiality. Right, sorry, I realize I'm not answering your question. Just reeling it back.
I love it because you're just expanding upon what I just ripped on, so it's good.
Right. So there's that, and but I just want to honor the fact that like owning it is a big deal, and it's not necessary in order to practice what it's more about owning, like what magic and power feels to you. So if you want to call yourself a magic maker, that's great, but if you want to claim the word witch, claim that too. There is no hierarchy. If people say there is, they're wrong. Like that's not the kind we're into. It really is about us being able to feel, resonate with, touch, explore, feel the herbs, do the things, make the tinctures, all the things. So there's all of that. So you asked my origin story. I rolled it back. Yes, I'm from a traveller origin. My mum and my dad. My dad was Roma Gypsy. My mama was from an Irish traveller family. You wouldn't know it to look at me. Of course you would. I have a very hefty lineage. Now, again, I don't want people to get caught up in like, oh, she comes from a lineage, and so like for the back of the book, people love to say like, oh, she's third generation. She's this, that, the other. Yes, I am, and you don't have to be. Like we have all the magic within us. Like we have it in us. So, but because I do have a particular kind of lineage. I do have a particular kind of medicine and magic that was carried through my entire maternal life. So, and that's sky reading. That's like reading the stars, feeling it in our body. That's making tinctures. That's herbal remedies. Like that's fortune telling. All of those yummy things were in my lineage. But then I got very, in the 90s, which I'm sure we'll come to at some point, I got very, what I perceived as cool. And I was like, I don't want anything to do with that. I'm not interested. I want to kiss boys. I want to follow boy bands. I want to do all the things that like everyone else around me is doing. I really desperately wanted to. So I really kind of separated myself from it. But I spent a lot of time with my nan, who is like, for me, just encapsulates all that is like this beautiful eclectic witch. She would use the same knife to cut the food for the dinner as she would for the spells that she was making, for the tinctures she'd make for the community who would come and like ask her like, I've got this wrong with me, what can I do? And she'd make a little thing and then she'd send them off, and like whether they were charms, whether they were for a certain amount of time. So they were all different. Like this was always happening. I spent a lot of time with her. So but my mama was very much trying to fit into the world, so she very much gets disconnected from her magic, and so I was very much aware.
It comes full circle with you,
right?
Incorporating it not only in your practice but within the world and making it something that fits.
Yeah, and I think that's it now. Is that was the understanding of this, coming back to what matters to me, to my roots. It's like, oh, wait up, it doesn't have to be a certain way, but I want to make sure that everyone recognizes we have this incredible potentiality within us all. And that's why I shared it. That's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, and I mean, and that comes across so beautifully, because again, it is, I think witch is a beautiful little lovely, especially for us, witches in the 90s that grew up with the craft and all of these other characters that like, even if you didn't consider yourself a witch, you identified and like were really intrigued by. I think that is something that it draws people in, and then it's like once they're in, the message that you give is so beautiful because it is about that reclamation of feminine power and just being in a place where you're accepting of whatever your intrinsic magic is. Speaking of those sort of like definitions of different witches, what do you identify most as?
I mean, like you, I think the eclectic witch is more of what most of us will find most comfortable in this current time and place, right? Because we have access to so much information, we have access to so many different possibilities that it can feel a bit like a buffet, right? Which is why the eclectic witch is, so it's great in a way. There's so many options, there's so many things to try out. And as long as we do that with respect, by the way, like, there has to be, like, especially if they come from other people's cultural beliefs, or if there was, like, you know, I've studied a lot of Italian witchcraft, and so there's a lot of practices that I incorporate into my own kind of rituals that are Strega based, you know, that are really like based in that. But like there has to be an honoring of that, and a real kind of, yeah, a bow to it. But I don't think we should also feel separate from like what's available either. Like I think, if we step kindly, everything done with love, kindness and respect, right?
I like to associate it with the idea of being in an earth environment. And if you're going to harvest, you know, fruit and things that you want from the earth, you are more than welcome to do that, but you don't want to do it to the point that you're degrading the soil and making it unusable for other people. And so I think that that's always the metaphor that I keep in mind. And like, I'm cherry picking from these different traditions, but am I draining a resource that someone else won't be able to use? And if that's the case, then it becomes problematic. But if you're doing it with respect and you're doing it from a place of not completely sucking it dry, because in my personal opinion, like spirituality has no background. Like it literally is using your intuition to whatever makes you connect to a higher power best. And so if that means that you're kind of waffling back and forth between these worlds, just again, like you said, do it respectfully.
So yeah, because I know that from the other end of that, right? Where there's like this very big like push towards all things gypsy, and that sounds very romantic, and that like there's this beautiful gypsy caravan and there's tarot readers and it's all very gorgeous, and people will use that as their tagline on Instagram, for instance, and it mean like this beautiful wandering soul, which, you know, if that's your truth, then awesome. And I'm very much on the receiving end of, like, I grew up with that. That was not how it was. You know, I got ridiculed, I got bullied, I got like name called because of that. And so I just think it really is like there is a level of respect. But I would say for me, like in terms of the style and now I feel like just a woman in my power. That's how I would call it. Like just a human on the spectrum of humanity who is really recognizing my power and then what I'm called to, right? So I trust, like, and it's more about trusting my intuition, trusting my senses as this woman, as this witch, to then recognize, right, okay, I'm gonna work with this, I'm gonna work with this, and act accordingly with that, versus do I follow any set path? Like, yes, nature is it, like nature, the rhythmical, cyclical nature of nature is my church, through my body, through the cosmos, through the nature outside my window, through like going into nature and recognizing the seasons unfolding. Like I can't live anywhere there's not seasons. And like I love California, but like I need a season.
I'm back in Chicago for that very reason. So.
Right, exactly. It's important. It's so well, and it's not necessary, but it is for me. It's very important, and I feel like that has been what's become the core, like the very like foundations of my roots, was, you know, recognizing my nan would grow the herbs to then make the tinctures, right? And me learning about that when I was very young, and then, like I say, turning my back, but now have my own herb garden, grow my own herbs, make my own tinctures, everything, make my teas. These things feel like my magic, and I think that's the important bit when you're looking at this. It's not about labels, it's not about going, I'm a this kind of witch or I'm a that kind of witch. It helps, but it's not about that. It's more about like, who am I as a human, and what's my magic, and what then could I put into place to support that? Like what rituals and practices can I then use to support that?
And for me, honestly, it's so great that we're focusing on the earth and the herbs, because that was the biggest shift for me in deciding to claim the title witch, is that I felt called so deeply, because I have air and water all throughout my chart and like a touch of Leo. And so like there's like nothing grounding me. So like my perspective around anything earth-based, like even crystals, like I'm come at that from more like a fairy soul. Like I'm like, oh, shiny, sparkly. Like I don't have anything in my life that's grounding. I don't usually gravitate to things that are like grounding and earthy. And I woke up and I was like, I need to learn all about all of the herbs right now, and I need to have them in my life, and I need to have something more connected to the earth, and I need to get my hands in soil. And like so that, I think those, in my mind anyway, those go hand in hand. The idea of being a witch and being connected to what grows in the earth was the biggest shift for me, and wanting to claim that as my title.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. And just recognizing that the rhythms are so important, like, because it slows us down. Like the world, the current cultural, especially in the kind of Western society, is not, it's not in our favor as kind of cyclical humans, you know, it really isn't. And so we have, that's why it's harder for us sometimes to remember our magic, right? So if we've got these touch points of us, you know, if you menstruate, if you have that in your body, but if there's like, you know, you recognize the seasons, if you recognize the cycles of the moon or of certain planets that you're called to, right? We have other ways of slowing it down and just realizing there's a more rhythmic nature to life that can be much more soothing, mainly on the nervous system, especially when we're so information bombarded.
It's more soothing than staring at a phone screen.
Imagine that.
Until the middle of the night when you can't even sleep now because you've been staring at the blue light. Yeah, I think that, and I mean, honestly, that's part of why, I mean, witchcraft and like cottagecore and like all of these things are having such a resurgence, because it's like, I think we are hitting sort of a tipping point where it's like, yeah, technology is great, but also like, what about the earth? Like, can I just move to a cottage in the middle of the woods and completely unplug? I think use that as an argument against technology, and I always love to think of everything as like those little like pendulum toys.
Absolutely.
And like, it's like we're always swinging from one degree to the next, but eventually the goal is to getting that resting point in the center, where we can use technology in a healthy way, but also recognize that we need. And I think we're getting there. I mean, there's so many people taking like mental health walks and things like that, and I think that it's beautiful to see that sort of like coming back into this centeredness.
And I think that's part of the remembering our magic, right? When we remember our magic and power as these cyclical beings, it's like, of course, we want to be able to hold it all. Like we want to be able to hold the potential, like the information that comes in. Then we want to take a little bit of time to integrate that information, recognize what's for us, what's not for us. Then we can make informed decisions. Then we can move forward. Then we can respond. Versus what happens if we're not rooted into anything cyclical, anything kind of rhythmical, we get very reactive, and that's when we get a little bit hard, a little bit constricted, a little bit tougher. Whereas if we're able to kind of stay open and a little softer, and softer doesn't mean, you know, that we're not aware. Like softer doesn't mean we're not strong and resilient either, but it's much more stretchy. We can get a bit more stretchier with our capacity to hold like more of what's available to us. So we can hold more of that technology whilst recognizing there's only so much of that I'm willing to hold. Not that I want to, it's just I'm not willing to take any more information on. So therefore now I need to be in nature. Therefore I need to go hug, like, you know, tree. I need to go touch the earth. I need to go and put my feet in the mud, you know, that sort of, yeah. And both, like you say, we're not working on the extremes. We're looking to hold it all, because that's how we manage these times which we're in. Because otherwise we'd have been back in the day. We would have been, well, probably were, but ultimately we're here now. So how do we use witchcraft or magic or whatever you want to call that? How do we use that to be very present and rooted and centered, and have this beautiful capacity to be with everything that's happening, whilst not being so in it that we react into everything and we feel like everything has to have an answer now.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I got a little distracted because as you were saying that, there was this beautiful like leaf fall that just happened right outside my window, and it was like synchronized. Like the earth is agreeing with you.
Good. I'm glad she's on board. I'm sure
she always is. But yeah, I think that's it's so important, and I think it's an equivalent to, I mean, if we take the fearfulness or the unrootedness of being too much in the information age and like not having that groundingness, if I were to give listeners anything, I would like to equate it to like when you look up something on like WebMD or something, when you're like trying to organize your symptoms and you're going this rabbit hole that's just not healthy. And even when you're doing it, you know it's not healthy and you're spiraling into this place of fear. And I think that anytime you get there, either literally with WebMD or metaphorically with any other aspects online, like that's when it's important to just like stop, and breathe and be like, maybe I'm going to go on that mental health walk now. I'm going to go touch a tree. And I'm a big tree hugger in all senses of the word. Like, I definitely has always been an environmentalist person. And like, that's one of the best things that's the one place that I've always have had that grounded rootedness is that like, if I'm exposed to too much energy, my empath senses are just like, I go out and I touch a tree and I just look like a weirdo on the street because I'm in the middle of a city. And so it's not like it's a private tree. It's just a tree on the sidewalk. And I just touch that tree until I feel better. And then I go about my day. So with that in mind, what are some of your personal rituals that help you to feel grounded and in your magic? Like, what's like a day-to-day magical practice for you? And I'm sure it varies, but like, what are kind of your essentials?
You know, I think essentials are, I mean, and this is definitely a technological one. Like, I won't go on the phone until I've like literally had some time for my subconscious to kind of figure out what the day's about, right? Like, so giving ourselves that little bit of time before the world kicks in, before other people, like to honor ourselves and just to connect in to my heart, to my belly, to my womb, and be like, right, okay, and breathe. Like, breathe in, breathe down, connect in, root down into my own being, so that I trust this one, so that I trust my body, so that I'm able to trust what comes next, because I don't know what's coming next. So we're not trusting, you know, so there's a lot of unknown in the world. And so if we don't trust this one and we're going straight out there, we get straight on the phone, we get straight into other people's opinions and thoughts, and we're not honoring ourselves. And so for me, it's the honoring of self. It's the self-sourcing. It starts there. You know, it starts really by sourcing ourselves. And then I can trust what I know versus what I'm being told, right? So that I can just make a little bit more. So then I guess it really is a case, and this is what I say to everyone, is like really creating your own map and practices that support you. So for me, it's like I do a lot of writing because that's my job. And so it's like I ritualize everything. Everything becomes a ritual. This is the altar, and like this body is the altar, and then the ritual is how I honor it. I am source. Like, if I connect into source, if I connect into the earth, Mama Earth, and like I call her up through this body and I ask for her to support me, then I'm sourced infinitely and as source, right? So then what I create can then be useful and can then be connected to something bigger than me. So it's not about me. I mean, sometimes it's about me, but for the most part, it's not about me.
You are rooted in yourself. It can be about you and it becomes about the bigger picture. Like, that's the beautiful trick of truly being in your power and in your intuition, is that you're doing things from a place of like, this is going to make me feel better, but ultimately it's coming from this higher channel and it's going to be for the greater good as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the books I write, they're always medicine for me first. And that has to be the truth. The practice of it, like I say, I light a candle, and then each book has a specific smell that I've created, that I'll create, whether it's oil or whether it's a perfume that specifically invokes something in me. But each book has its own candle, each book has its own smell, each book has its own.
I have to pause you there and ask, do you remember which was? Like, do you remember?
Smell?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just trying to think. Yeah. Which was a combination, and to be honest, like everything is like everything has a rose in it. Everything has always had rose in it because rose is my matrilineal. Yes. Rose is really important to me. Like, my whole family have loved roses, and so I've got a rose in the garden where I get roses and I put them in.
A little sidebar plug for your amazing Patreon. I know you like the roses because of all your Patreon riffs. And so we've got the Venus rose, we've got Mary Magdalene rose, we've got rose is a big theme.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all of them a beautiful healing oil.
Yeah, so. And so I'm just trying to think now. You've got me because I can't remember. I know self-sorcery was rose and mugwort. If you don't remember. No, rose and mugwort was self-sorcery, but which was? Oh my goodness, I can't remember. This is awful. No, I can't remember, and that's okay.
That's all right. It's all right. Across the board, rose is magical, though.
But know that everyone has that undertone of rose. But also, I think it's just really important to remember that this ritualization it helps us to remember. That's all you know, when I'm thinking about the everydayness, instead of thinking there has to be these big rituals, these big, like, and I'm a big fan. Like, I love the bells and whistles and all the fancies. I love it all. And I'm also acutely aware, like, there are mamas, there are people that got to get on with their day, that there's stuff to be done. So if we can just remember to connect in the morning, and then, like, just throughout the day, ritualize whatever can be ritualized, right? And even the brushing of our teeth, even the eating of the food, the blessing of the food, like, that happens, you know, just bless the food. Like, it doesn't, you know, thank you, thanks. Like, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. And that's how we are going to respell, because, like, society has got a strong spell upon us, right? Like, the societal spell is currently very strong. And so it's really hard for us within that to remember. Like, so we can gather here, you can listen to this on a podcast, you can watch it, you can hear it, and you'll be like, oh, and there'll be nothing we've shared where that's brand new. It'll be like, oh, and it'll sink down somewhere, and it'll ignite and evoke something in you. Be like, yes, and it's a remembrance, and that's beautiful. Then you have to go back out in the world, right? Then you have to go. So it's like we need these constant little rituals of remembrance, so that we can keep coming back, so that we then start to reweave and respell our reality, our possibility within that. Because I'm not saying, like, we're not changing what's going on out there, because we're recognizing it, we live in it. And that's what I don't want to do. I see that in this community quite a lot, is that people are like, oh, we're just like, we're going to create a new world. And I'm like, yeah, or we could really tend to the reality of what comes next, right? Like, so instead of thinking we have to create this all over again, we get to co-create with Mama Nature, with the cosmos. We get to co-create and respell what comes next. We get to do that in collaboration with each other's, like, magic, like, recognizing that we each hold a thread, that we all each hold a different thing. We don't need to know it all. We might do. We might be really clever and really smart, or it might just be that there are certain things that just, like, are our magic and medicine to share with the world, and that's enough. And so we might share that with one person. It might be over a cup of tea and a conversation, right? It could just be any of those things. It's about honoring the small, beautiful little rituals that just bring the romance back into our existence, because that's, I believe, that's
my favorite line. To bring the romance back into our existence. Yeah, because I was thinking in my head, it's like, oh, it's like touchstones to the self, but I love romance, because that is, and that's honestly why I think so many people do resonate with the title witch or magic or whatever, because, like, we do have, like, you're doing the same things that you're doing on a daily basis most of the time, but it's like you're doing it with that sense of romance or that sense of magic, and that brings a little bit more wonder back into your day-to-day life.
And this is what we need, and this is what's necessary. That's what I mean. The world doesn't need changing. We need to remember that beautiful magic and then respell it with the romance, with the joy, with the wonderment. And that's not to say that bad stuff won't still happen, by the way. I'm not saying, like, we're going to be all like fairies and rainbows and that good stuff, which is lovely. I'm not saying that at all. Like, I'm very much about the witch knows the dark so that she can be the light. We know that. We experience these cycles so that we know death and rebirth intimately, so that we know the dark, so that we plant our roots, and, like, we plant our seeds and we're rooted in the dark, so that we can then rise and ascend into this beautiful light space where we can be of service to ourselves and to each other, which is ultimately how we get back to the magic of it all, I think.
Absolutely. Oh, I love it. Yeah, it is. I think that is what drew me back into it, is, like, the idea of making a ritual out of my everyday life. And I think that it's making it more intriguing to tap into the self, because I think self-care has gotten a little bogged down in some cases, and it feels like a chore. And so if you're like, oh, I'm going to go do a magical ritual, and it's probably the same thing that you would have been advised to do for your self-care, that's going to make it that much more intriguing.
Self-care has also been capitalized on, right, as well. It's like $1 million zillion industry. And so there's also that element. So actually remembering what you want to do versus, like, oh, you should have a bath. I mean, when you asked about self-care rituals, that's definitely one of mine. Like, I love a bath. I'm all water. Like, my whole chart is water.
Oh yeah,
So
we're
I
in your
love a bath.
season. We just entered into Scorpio season, so
I
you're in the
know.
light right now.
I love it that most people like, this is like the season of death and intensity and let go, and I come alive. Like, I literally come alive in this season.
I have a Scorpio midheaven and a Scorpio Mars, so I feel that.
You know.
So yeah.
You know. So I think that, but it's recognizing that, yes, those things are, but like you say, it's the intent. Like, and I feel like that's the bit about us as witches, is that we set the intent for the thing. Like, so that's part of the spell. Like, so it's not that you have to have any fancy spells. It's always like, again, poetry is a spell. Like, what we speak is a spell. So the positive words and we can say to each other, and negative words we can say to each other, are also spells, right? So we get to respell what that means in terms of what we say, but also just in terms of how we act. And so that intent becomes, for me, is the center of any spell if you're writing one. But if you're just speaking your truth, if you're just speaking to existence, it's like, I'm, I set the intent for this bath to be a cleansing situation. It can just be as simple as that, versus like it needing to do anything else, that this is just going to cleanse me, it's going to cleanse my heart, I feel a bit heavy, I just need to let go. And then you can add some rose quartz. Then you can add some rosemary for purification. Yes. Then you can start mixing it up. Mm-hmm. But always keep that intent for what it is. Like, what's this action? What's the intent of my action? And that's spellcraft in action, everyday life. You don't have to do anything other than that if you don't want to.
Absolutely. It absolutely can be as simple. And that's something that I've been learning as well, because I've been doing a lot of work around energy protection, and I have a whole visualization that I do every morning, but every once in a while I find myself on the street and I'm like, oh, I forgot to do it. And I'm like, okay, cool. Just state it. Like, I am now protected. And like, that's, so it can be a simple ritual or it can be elaborate. And I think that's very important for the baby witches of the world, because it does feel so overwhelming to be like, oh my God, I need to know about what every single herb in the world does right now. So that like I talked about with mine. Speaking of herbs, I'm curious what your essential herbs are.
Essential ones: rosemary and mugwort.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about what those do?
Yeah, so rosemary is like this beauty, like, you can grow, it grows anywhere. So I really like everything to be so simple, right? Like, it grows anywhere and you can use it for almost everything, right? So I use it, like, it's in the garden, so I use it in cooking, but you can then also, it's like a purification. Like, so it's just like the smell, if you dry it and burn it, like, as a for the smoke is purifying. You can use the oil's brilliant for your hair growth. It's like, there's so many different, like, again, I just love that. I like things to be multi-purpose, right? And mugwort is
after my own heart.
Yeah, right. And so mugwort is the witch's herb. Like, it's just this really, it smells disgusting. It's disgusting. I'm not going to lie to you. It tastes disgusting, but oh my goodness, I have it in tea. And so, like I say, when I was writing Self Sorcery, it was definitely a tea that I drank regularly, because it evokes, it's very good for dreaming. It really is really good for dream time.
I've heard you can put mugwort under your pillow.
Yeah, so you don't even have to ingest it, right? Like, a mugwort is another version of, so if sage isn't indigenous to where you're from, if I grow my own sage in the garden, right? But mugwort's a very British witch situation. But I mean, it's everywhere, but like, British witches are like, they make this kind of smoke sticks this big, and it's pungent. It's so pungent, but it's a cleanser. And so I'm big on, like, the energy. When the energy gets heavy, we need to lift it with smoke. That's one of my big medicines for me. And it's like, sometimes, like, I love to have an aromatherapy diffuser, but that's lovely. But if you need to do some heavy lifting, we get the mugwort and the rosemary and we just like waft it. We make it into a beautiful little stick, and then you burn that and clear your space. And it's like, purification, clearing the energy, so that your energy can be the dictating force, the kind of intention setter from the start.
Sure. Oh, love that. Any other tools that you like to recommend for baby?
Again, I love a tool, right? Like, so I love everything, but I always want, like, so there's not, there's no set things. Like,
Yeah.
that's what I mean.
I mean, again,
I
we're
like,
just talking about your experience. So what are your
yeah,
favorites?
like, so for me, it's very much about this body. This body is the tool. This body is, that's why the smoke is important. That's why the bath is important. That's why that it's constantly cleansed so that I can be a clear channel for the most part, right? So that I can be rooted into what matters to me. Like, so I understand dark matter so that I can see what matters in this world, this lifetime, this now, right? So that for me, those things are the important parts. I love crystals. Like, so I've got a shit ton. I love them. I love crystals. I love herbs. So I love like homeopathy. I love making tinctures, like all of those things. But what I really want to state, I just think it's so important, especially for the baby ones, is that you don't need any of that. Like, it's not, I don't want any of that stuff to become a stick to beat yourself with, like, because you've not got the right tools, you've not got the right things. It's like, yeah, know what days coincide with the planets. That's a lovely thing, but it's not essential. Like, know what day, know what the moon is up to. That is essential. No, it's not essential. It's not essential. But
Cancer.
it really
Yes,
helps.
it is.
But like, recognizing what phase the moon will always help you understand what you're feeling. That's just like
Especially for us water signs. I feel like maybe if you don't
especially,
apply to water, yeah.
especially for those signs, but it helps.
And I think that, yeah, it's definitely, like you said, it's not about the tools. It's about the connecting to your body. And if you're connecting
And
to your
don't
body,
get me wrong, I love them. I don't want you to think
for
like
sure.
it's not.
Well,
not
and
necessary,
what
but they're
I'm
not
hearing
necessary.
from you and also infusing from my own experience is I think that the more that you learn that connection to the body and the connection to the intuition, you'll be guided to the information that you need next.
And that's what I say to everyone is like, when they say, oh, what does this crystal do? What does this herb do? Like, none of it, what my nana used to do, and this is in Witch, is what, like, when I was going, oh, Nana, what do we use this for? And she'd be like, what do you think it's for? And like, or she'd say, like, we're gonna make a a tincture for somebody and they've got a sore head. Like, what do you think? Like, what are you drawn to? What do you feel? And of course, she would never have let me then go, like, kind of give it to somebody without knowing what we're putting in. But like, she allowed that trust to build. And I feel like that's what I say to anyone. They're like, oh, what goddesses should I work with? What crystals work for what? It's like, if you go into a crystal shop and there's something on your heart, like if you're like, oh, I need something for this, like I split up, or I feel grief, or I've got this, and you go into a crystal shop, or you're like, just feel what one you're drawn to, and that will have the medicine you need, because it might not be the thing you think it is, right? Like, it might not, what you think you're feeling might actually be, there might be a deeper root that the crystal will speak to you about.
Yeah. I feel like that's almost like a divination practice in itself.
It is.
You
Absolutely.
pick up a crystal, you're drawn to a crystal, and you don't know what it's for, but you look it up and you're like, oh, I didn't even realize I needed this, but my body, my intuition, everything within you is drawn to it. So
yeah, and also feeling before you look up as well. Like, I'm a big fan of like feeling and then going like, what are you for? And then writing down what you think it's for, and then go look. Now, I always say that about goddesses as well. Like, people often ask me about, like, oh, what is Mary Magdalene about? Tell me what books to read, tell me what to read. And I'm like, just feel first what she means to you, and then go look her up. Then go look up those goddesses, because it's like, they'll all have, like, so the crystal will have a different relationship with you than it would with than it would with me, perhaps. Like, it can have a universal appeal, but to me it might be doing something very specific for my heart. For you, it might be doing something very specific for your belly, because that belly needs to be soft, or so, whatever reason. Like, so we have to, this is how we then start to trust and build this this capacity for our intuitive nature to guide us, versus trusting Google.
And also that comes back to the intention setting too, because if you believe that something is for X, Y, and Z, then it's gonna be for X, Y, and Z. Because
we're taught these, aren't we? That's how we're taught. Like, everything's taught that way. Like, oh, this has got this is for this, and this, and it's not how. Well,
and if
it's
you
not
start with your own belief rather than looking up the belief, then you're setting the intention, you're infusing that power into that object, regardless of what it is that you find out about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Oh, so thank you for being here for this interview portion. Listeners, I highly recommend, yes, Baby Witches, you want to check out Lisa's book, Witch, but you want to check out all of her books because they're all filled with magic. I could not live without the discoveries that I made with Code Red, which is your cycle diaries essentials. Love Your Lady Landscape, Self Sorcery. You're working on a couple other ones. So depending on when you're listening to this, there might be more in this wealth of knowledge. But again, just like we talked about with the magical tools, go check out the selection and find what your intuition draws you towards. And that's going to be like your metaphorical crystal, and you're going to get what you need from that.
I love that.
And with that in mind, we are going to transition into our next episode. So listeners, if you're watching this live, the Thursday after this interview episode, we will have our Total Betty Goddess deck reading with Lisa. And if you are watching this later on, you want to check that out next in line. And we are going to cut to that card reading now.
Find out more about Lisa by following her on Instagram, Sassy Lisa Lister, or check out her website, thesassyshe.com. You can also find out more information there about her She Power Collective, of which I am a member and I highly recommend. And of course, I highly recommend, if you have not yet, that you check out her book, Witch, for all things magical. This episode of Please Don't Eat the Sage was brought to you in part by my Patreon members. So I'd like to thank Ashley, Laura, Caitlin, Amanda, and Karen. If you'd like to join their ranks, you can do so over at patreon.com/Michelle Shea. You can also support this podcast by pre-ordering your own copy of the Total Betty Goddess deck, or head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review.